Hi, I'm Marie. Welcome to Marie's Kitchen. I'm so glad you're back. Today we're making a homemade all butter pie crust in the food processor. And this is one of my favorite things to make. I know pie crust can seem really intimidating and kind of finicky, but I promise with the tips and tricks that I'm going to show you here today, you are going to be turning out homemade pie crust in no time. Let's get started. So, homemade all butter pie crust. Let's talk about what you need. First, you need all-purpose flour, white granulated sugar, salt, a stick or a half cup of cold unsalted butter, and some cold water. So first I'm going to give you just kind of a big picture of what's going on and what we're aiming for with these ingredients in this food processor. And first what we want to do is we're going to add the dry ingredients to the food processor and mix those together. Then we'll add the butter. We're using cold butter. I just got it out of the refrigerator, and the reason you're using cold butter is because you don't want it to combine too much with the flour. Really, you're wanting little pieces of butter coated in flour. And then when you roll that out, the butter pieces will release steam when they melt, and you'll get these nice flakes in your dough. So what you're trying to avoid is over combining the butter and the flour. If it's completely combined like a cookie dough where you don't see any butter, it's just combined, it's going to be tough and dense and not a lot of flakes. Hopefully that will help you understand a lot of the things we do, which is why we use cold butter, why we use cold water, why you don't overmix it. It's all to keep these pieces of butter intact. So the first thing you'll need is a food processor, and you can make this without a food processor. You can in fact just make it with your fingers, and I'll walk you through that in another video. But today we're using a food processor. It's the quickest way, and I'm a huge fan. One thing to look for when you are getting a food processor is to have a rubber kind of band here around the edge, so when you do lock it into place, it's not going to leak. Sometimes if it's just plastic to plastic, the flour will leak out the sides. So we're going to add 1 1/4 cup flour to the food processor. The best way to measure is really to just spoon it into the 1 cup measuring cup and then use a knife to level it off. So there is 1 cup flour, and then we'll need 1/4 cup more. So it's 1 1/4 cup all-purpose flour. Level that off. Now we'll do a little pinch of salt. You don't want to overdo the salt. On the sugar, this is kind of to your preference. You can do anywhere from a teaspoon to a tablespoon. You could do 2 tablespoons or even up to 1/4 cup if you want it really sweet. My preference is a tablespoon. My mom likes it a little less sweet. She uses more like a teaspoon. Now we have the dry ingredients in the food processor. We're going to pulse that to combine. Now we're going to add 1 stick or 1/2 cup, 8 tablespoons of butter. This is unsalted butter, and it's very cold. I've had it in the refrigerator. And again, the reason you want your butter cold is because if it's really soft and warm, it will just too easily combine with the flour, and you'll end up with the dense crust that I mentioned in the beginning. We're of course going for the little pieces of butter covered in flour, which roll out and give you the flakes. Okay, so here's our butter. I'm going to just slice it into about 7 or 8 slices, about tablespoon size. And some people cube it, some people I've heard grate it, but this works well and it's easy. And I'm going to pop those pieces of butter right in the food processor without handling too much. Remember, your hands are 98.6 degrees, and so handling the butter actually warms it and softens it, which is again not what we're going for. So cold butter in the food processor, and we'll give that a pulse. There we go. So we have our butter mixed with the flour, and there are some big pieces and some small pieces, and that's exactly what you're going for. Now we're going to add 5 tablespoons of cold water. 2, 3, 4, 5. I made this pie crust with my mom growing up, and she would always put ice in the water to keep it really cold. If you do use ice and it starts to melt and there's little pieces of ice in the water, just be careful not to get those pieces of ice in the dough. If you end up with actual pieces of ice in your dough, it'll melt when you're rolling it out, and then you have these big puddles and really sticky places in your dough. So don't get the ice in the dough. Now we're gonna pulse this to combine. That looks great. So here is our pie dough. It's not over combined, it's still very crumbly. It looks like it would be impossible to roll out, but I'm going to show you how to do that in just a minute. And I'm going to take the blade out of the food processor. Now we're going to put out a piece of Glad press and seal. And you can use saran wrap. It's a little harder to work with, but either one will work. So pull out a nice big piece of saran wrap. Then we'll take the bowl of the food processor and just flip it right onto the press and seal. There you go. Here's your pie crust. All done. No, just kidding. So this still looks kind of scary. It seems like this is not going to work out, right? How are we going to roll that out? Well, first we're going to pull it together, then we're going to chill it, and then we'll roll it out. And as you can see, when we squeeze it together, it does come together like a pie dough. Let's pull this together. This is kind of my hack for making this into a disc. You just pull the corners up. All the corners come together in a little bunch. Then you twist it around a few times to close it, and then shape your pie dough into a disc, a round disc. Now the pie crust is nicely tied up into the press and seal. It's in a disc. You can see pieces of butter in the flour, which that will result in flakes in your pie crust. So this is a great looking pie crust. Now we'll put it in the refrigerator to let it rest. And what we're doing there is letting the gluten rest. The problem is if you have active gluten in your pie crust, when you roll it out, it's going to be pulling back together, and we don't want that. We want to roll it out and have it keep its shape while it's baking. So I'm going to put the pie crust in the refrigerator and let it chill for about 30 minutes. What pie plate do you use? That is a great question. I'm going to show you several here. There are so many options out there. Most of them work very well. You just need to be aware of the size of the pie plate and make sure your recipe fits that pie plate. For example, this is a deep dish pie plate. To use this, you'll need to find a recipe for deep dish pie, like a deep dish apple pie. If you don't find a deep dish recipe, your crust won't fit and your filling won't fill. And I have actually made a standard apple pie recipe in a deep dish pie plate, and the apple pie was all sunk down because there wasn't enough apples to fill it up. So it was a very sad looking pie. And so from that I learned, do not use a deep dish pan unless you are making a deep dish recipe. This is just a little disposable aluminum pie plate. I like these. I use them for all my classes. I like them because they're small enough to where all the crust will fit in easily, the apples fit in easily. It's not going to be like with a deep dish pie, you're not going to have a sagging little pie. The one thing you need to be careful with on these disposable pie plates is they are wobbly. And so if you use an aluminum pie plate, you just need to be careful when you're holding it and transporting it. This one was actually my mother's, and she passed it down to me, so this one is super special. I have vivid memories of pumpkin pie in this every Thanksgiving growing up. So I love this pie plate. I don't use it quite as much, and the main reason is that it doesn't have a lip here. I really like to have a lip to set my crust on, and this just doesn't have one. This is a Pyrex. I love my Pyrex pie plates. This one is a 9.5 inch. I prefer the 9 inch, a little smaller. This one also, like the metal one, does not have a lip here, a flat lip sticking out, like for example this one does. This is the lip here, and you can put your edge on here and make it decorative, or you could put decorations. With these it's much harder. What about the rolling pin? Well, there's a lot out there and almost any will work. I'll show you my favorites. This is actually one of my favorites. It's from Amazon. It was probably about $7 or $8, so it's very cheap. And it's just a nice weight. It's well built. It has handles that I do sometimes like to use when I'm rolling. Sometimes I just press like this, and then sometimes if you need more pressure, you can use the handles. So I like having handles on it. It's not the fanciest one out there for sure, but clearly you don't need that for rolling out a pie crust. This one is so beautiful. I think it's an olive wood and it's just gorgeous. My only complaint about this one is that the handles don't move, and I don't like having to hold handles that don't move, because I mean, you can use it just to press, but you can't hold the handles or the rolling pin won't turn. Some people have marble rolling pins, long marble rolling pins, usually without any handles at all. I have one, I'm not sure where it is. I never use it. It's a little bit heavy and bulky, and it's just not that easy to manipulate, not as easy as this one. Okay, this is my favorite part. We chilled the pie crust for about 30 minutes and now we get to roll it out. Love rolling out pie crust. To me, it feels like Play-Doh or an art class, and it's just so soothing and satisfying. So I'm going to show you all my tips and tricks for making rolling out a pie crust really easy, and I just can't wait to hear if you get to try it. So we'll just take the dough out of the saran wrap, set that aside. Now we'll need some flour on our surface. Little flour, not too much because this will absorb the flour, and so if you use a whole lot of flour on your rolling area, then this is going to start getting out of proportion and have too much flour. But you definitely do want to have enough so that it won't stick. I'll just put a little pile here, sprinkle some on top. Now, what I do is I use my hands to flatten the dough out a little bit, like this. And this just gets us into a bigger circle, because remember, we want it in a circle for a pie plate, so this just gets us there a little quicker. So we kind of press it out into a nice circle like that, and you don't want to handle it too much with your hands because that will melt the butter, but a little bit, just flattening out the pie crust does help a lot. If when you get your pie crust out of the refrigerator, say you leave it in, instead of 30 minutes, you leave it in overnight and it is just very, very, very cold, you'll need to let it sit at room temperature for about 5 minutes to warm up a tiny bit. If the pie crust is too cold, it will not roll out. So it is something you kind of have to, get a feel for, but this one definitely feels like I can roll it out. If it was just hard as a rock, you need to let it come to a little warmer temperature at room temperature for maybe 5 minutes. So keep that in mind. I'm always trying to troubleshoot pies here because I know there's always just different problems that come up that need to be solved. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment. If there's something that really stopping you in making pie crust, leave a comment, let me know. I'd love to do another video just doing all your troubleshooting. I'm gonna put a little flour here on our rolling pin. And then we're gonna roll out the pie dough. And it's quite a bit of pressure. And then every time you roll, you're going to twist the pie 1/4 turn. And what this is going to do is going to help you get a more even circle. And the other thing it does is that it prevents it from sticking to your rolling surface. If it starts to feel a little stuck in places, you can just slip a little flour under there. Now, as it starts to get bigger, it will become a little more delicate. So you need to be careful with it. And we're gonna turn it again to make sure it's not sticking. And this is looking so incredible. See, there's these big pieces of butter here, and then there's small pieces of butter scattered throughout. This is just a beautiful pie crust. So how do you know when to stop rolling? Well, you need your pie crust to be big enough to fit in your pie plate and come up all the way over the sides. They make a lot of gadgets to help you measure diameter. They have placemats that you can roll on and then see how big it's getting. I find the most useful thing to do is take your pie plate, this is the one I'm going to use, and just turn it on top of the dough and see if it fits. It needs to have a good inch or two past the edge of the pie plate to make sure it'll fit all the way down in. So this is not quite big enough yet. I'm going to roll it a little more. And we can move it a bit to make sure it's not sticking. And let's try measuring again. So there we go. Okay, this has a nice circle around the edge of the pie plate. So now we're going to just take the dough. I like to just fold it in half. Then you can just put the fold right in the middle of the pie plate and unfold the crust. So there we have our pie crust in our pie plate, and you can see it is hanging over the edge, there's plenty of crust. If there's not enough crust, you need to take it off and roll it out more. You cannot at this point stretch it. If you do stretch it out, it will shrink back, and that always makes a very sad pie. Have it hanging over the edge, and then there's plenty that you can just kind of fit this into the pie plate without stretching or pulling or anything. It just kind of fits right in. From here, what you do depends on what kind of filling you're going to use. If you're using a custard filling like key lime pie, coconut cream pie, lemon curd pie, those you're going to want to bake this first, and that's called blind baking. For pies like apple, where you want a double crust, you'll put the apples in, do the same process with the second crust, fold it over, and then tuck in the edges, and then that one we don't blind bake. For something like a pecan pie or a pumpkin pie, make a decorative edge on this pie crust, add your filling, and then bake it all together. So a lot of people ask about blind baking. Do I need to do it with pumpkin pie? Do I need to do it with apple pie? I personally do not. I only blind bake when I'm working with a cold custard pie. Now I'll show you how to do a decorative edge on the pie crust. So first you can trim off little bits of it because it's not, evenly hanging over. It's sort of uneven. And so if there's a big part that's hanging off, you can trim that. And we can save that for decorations. Now we'll take this pie crust and we're going to fold it under itself and kind of stack it on this lip of the pie plate. So you want to make sure, I often see in my pie classes when I'm telling people to tuck it under, they're tucking it under the lip of the pie plate, and that is just going to melt down the side. So you're actually just tucking it under itself and then propping it all up on the lip of the pie plate. So there's nothing down here below this lip. So we're just going to tuck it under. You can put a little flour on your hands if it gets sticky. So then we'll just keep making the edge here, tucking under. Okay, tuck the edges under, and if you're getting kind of too much in one space, just pinch it off. And then I will show you a easy little decorative edge to make it even more festive. For the decoration, there's a few different things you can do. Some people like to use a fork, and you just use the tines of a fork and press it right along the edge here, and it makes just a decorative, simple edge. That one's very easy. Another one you can do is with your thumb and fingers. So I usually dip them in a little bit of flour, and then you'll just use your finger and then thumb and fingers, and we're just going to press the dough in between there. So pressing the dough in between your two fingers creates this little fluted edge. Pressing the dough in between my fingers. A little flour if it gets sticky. You can just zip around the pie crust and do that. Okay, now there is our edge, fluted edge on the pie crust, just like that. Super easy. Now what I'll do is cover this with some saran wrap and put it in the freezer. Thanks so much for joining us on Marie's Kitchen. Today we made a homemade all butter pie crust in the food processor. We talked about pie plates, rolling pins, so now hopefully you have all the basics you'll need to get in the kitchen and try your hand at a homemade pie crust. And if you have any trouble, please leave me a comment, let me know, because that's really what this is about. It's about you guys having some really delicious recipes that you feel very comfortable and confident making. So with that in mind, I hope you'll like and subscribe so we can stay in touch. I've got more videos coming up, and we'll make more traditions for your family and see more smiles on people's faces. From my kitchen to yours, thank you.